This is Geoscope, your global lens on the world's biggest shifts. And today, Canada may be steering into one of its boldest trade reversals in decades. A 100% tariff on Chinese EVs, once hailed as a protective wall for automakers, has backfired, sparking Beijing's crippling counterstrike on canola, leaving prairie farmers reeling. Now the tone in Ottawa is changing. Prime Minister Mark Carney hints at flexibility. Foreign Minister Melanie Joly admits the tariff itself is under review. And both farmers and automakers are demanding clarity. This isn't just about crops or cars. This is about Canada's economic future. Buckle up. The choices ahead could rewrite the nation's trade map. 1. How the standoff began. EV tariffs and farm blowback. October 2024. As the world grappled with a new era of global competition, Canada made its move. The decision reflected a growing global trend of economic protectionism, a response to warnings from domestic industries. The weapon of choice, a staggering 100% tariff on Chinese-made electric vehicles. This wasn't a subtle adjustment, it was a firewall, designed to effectively double the price of these cars and slam the door on what Ottawa viewed as a flood of unfairly subsidized competition. The Trudeau-era policy was sold as a lifeline for domestic automakers. Canada's legacy auto sector was in the midst of an expensive transition, with billions being poured into retooling factories. The government argued that without this shield, automakers, struggling to catch up in the global EV race, could be wiped out before they ever had a chance to compete. The pitch was clear. China's rise wasn't just competition. It was artificially engineered, fueled by massive subsidies, cheap loans, and controlled supply chains. The fear was that Chinese firms could sell cars at a loss, a practice known as dumping, crushing Canadian factories before they ever found footing. Within months, Beijing struck back with surgical precision. They didn't hit auto parts. They hammered Canadian agriculture. Canola seed, a cornerstone of the Prairie economy, was slapped with a crippling 75.8% tariff. Peas and other key exports were targeted too, creating a ripple effect of economic pain. The blow landed hardest on Saskatchewan and the Prairie provinces. For these regions, China is a critical buyer, accounting for billions in annual revenue. The economic shockwave was centered squarely on the agricultural heartland, thousands of kilometers from the auto plants the tariff was meant to protect. What started as protection for cars quickly turned into a two-front fight, defending automakers in Ontario on one side and desperate farmers on the prairies on the other. It was a stark reminder of a fundamental truth. Canada learned the classic trade lesson: one industry shield becomes another sacrifice. To Ottawa's changing tune, from hardline to hesitation. For months, Ottawa's position was resolute. The EV tariff, a cornerstone of its new industrial strategy, was declared untouchable. It was framed as a necessary shield for Canada's auto sector, a bold made-in-Canada policy designed to protect jobs in the manufacturing heartlands of Ontario and Quebec. The message from the Prime Minister's office was clear: Canada would not be a dumping ground for cheap foreign EVs. This hardline stance was meant to project strength, aligning with allies while carving out a protected space for Canadian manufacturing to retool for the future. But by mid-2025, cracks showed. The policy's unintended consequences were hitting the nation's agricultural sector hard. In a swift retaliation, China had slammed the door on Canadian agricultural imports. Across the prairies, farmers organized with a desperate urgency. This wasn't just lobbying, it was a fight for survival. They descended on Parliament Hill, warning that their way of life was being sacrificed to protect another industry. For them, China wasn't an adversary, it was their single largest customer. The numbers were staggering. The canola industry alone is worth 43 billion CAD and supports 200,000 jobs, too big to ignore. And it wasn't just canola. Soybean and pork producers were also facing catastrophic losses. The shift began with Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe's trip to Beijing. With his province at the epicenter of the crisis, Moe took a political gamble. The move was initially mocked by federal officials as rogue diplomacy. But as the economic pain deepened, Moe's gambit looked prescient. In a stunning reversal, Prime Minister Carney publicly thanked the Premier, a rare signal of openness. Soon after, Foreign Minister Joly made a crucial admission. The policy itself was under review. She floated diversification, new markets in Japan, South Korea, and Europe. But this was a long-term hope, not a short-term fix. The final blow came from Agriculture Minister Heath MacDonald. He went further, stating publicly that even the tariff could be rolled back. Ottawa's once iron stance was softening into pragmatic recalibration, forced by the immense weight of the agricultural lobby. The government was caught, learning that national interest wasn't a monolith, but a delicate balancing act. The great irony, however, was that just as politics shifted to appease one crisis, the auto market itself was unraveling for entirely different reasons. 3. EV market fallout, a policy backfires. Farmers weren't the only casualties. Canada's auto sector was also stumbling. By mid-2025, EV sales had collapsed, down nearly 40% year over year. EVs slid from 18% of new registrations to just 8.6%. Why? Prices soared. Incentives shrank. Most premium EVs exceeded rebate caps. Provinces pulled back. BC scrapped its subsidy in May. Quebec barely kept its own after public outrage. With affordable Chinese EVs priced out by tariffs, buyers walked away. Momentum toward Ottawa's 2026 zero-emission target evaporated. The government quietly shelved the mandate, rolled out relief funds, and watched its EV strategy stumble. The tariff meant to defend the auto sector had instead gutted demand, leaving automakers weaker than ever. 4. Prairie fallout. Canola in the crosshairs. If automakers stumbled, farmers were devastated. Canola, the crown jewel of prairie agriculture, became ground zero in China's retaliation. That 75.8% tariff shut the market, triggered a 6.5% plunge in futures, and sparked oversupply fears. For Saskatchewan, where canola exports to China were worth $5 billion in 2024, it was catastrophic. Ottawa promised aid. Carney pointed to Scott Moe's Beijing trip as progress, but farmers saw little relief. They didn't want subsidies. They wanted their market back. Anger grew. Prairie premiers demanded action. Farmers accused Ottawa of sacrificing them to protect Ontario's auto sector. And as debt piled up, unsold crops rotted and rural communities edged toward decline. The trade war hit Canada's heartland hardest. So what comes next? As the global EV landscape shifts, Canada finds itself at a critical intersection, facing a complex web of options, pitfalls, and possibilities. The path forward is anything but clear, and every choice carries profound consequences for the nation's economic future. The first option is perhaps the most straightforward. Hold the line. This means maintaining the current tariff, creating a protective wall around Canada's legacy automakers in Ontario and Quebec. It's a defensive strategy, designed to shield tens of thousands of jobs from a tidal wave of low-cost competition. But this fortress has a glaring vulnerability. Beijing would almost certainly retaliate, slamming the door on Canadian agricultural exports. For farmers on the prairies who depend on the Chinese market, it could trigger a devastating collapse. Option 2 represents a complete reversal, a full rollback of the tariff. This is the free market gambit. The immediate effect would be a flood of affordable Chinese EVs, potentially turbocharging Canada's sluggish adoption rates and helping meet climate targets ahead of schedule. The agricultural sector would breathe a sigh of relief as trade with China normalizes. But the cost could be catastrophic for domestic industry. Faced with hyper-efficient state-subsidized competition, Canadian and North American automakers could be completely overwhelmed, risking plant closures and a hollowing out of the manufacturing heartland. Then there is a third, more intricate path: strategic negotiation. This isn't about a simple yes or no, but a carefully managed compromise. It could involve a partial rollback of the tariff, or a quota system that allows a controlled number of Chinese EVs in. In this scenario, tariff relief becomes a powerful bargaining chip. Ottawa could demand that Beijing reopen its markets to Canadian crops as a precondition. It could even pressure Chinese EV giants to invest directly in Canada, building factories and creating jobs here, turning a competitor into a partner. The risks are immense. The negotiations could fail, leading to the worst of both worlds. And politically, it could be framed as a surrender to Beijing. But the potential rewards are equally significant. Cheaper cars for consumers, a revived agricultural sector, new manufacturing investments, and a domestic auto industry pushed to become more competitive in the long run. This decision will echo from the factory floors of Windsor to the farmlands of Saskatchewan. It will be felt in the budgets of ordinary families and the boardrooms of global corporations. Ultimately, the choice will define Canada's economic identity for a generation, and its place in the new electrified world. Final verdict, a turning point on Canada's trade track. Canada is barreling toward a defining choice: cling to the 100% tariff wall, or pivot to flexibility. The results of the hard line are already visible. EV sales in freefall, farmers in crisis, consumers left with fewer options. Protection bought time, but no momentum. A smarter play would tie tariff relief to real wins: restored canola access, firm auto investment pledges, including from Chinese firms willing to build in Canada, diversified imports to keep markets competitive. Handled right, this standoff could transform from crisis to industrial strategy, strengthening both farms and factories. The question now, will Canada pivot smartly or double down on a crumbling wall? Now we turn it over to you. Should Ottawa scrap the tariff to save farmers, even if automakers take the hit? Would you buy a Chinese EV if the price dropped? Should Canada prioritize crops, cars, or balance both? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And for more breaking trade and auto geopolitics, make sure you're subscribed to Geoscope. This story is just getting started.